Welcome back to Healedish. This is part 2 of Alisha's story of spilling the Kool-Aid on the crazy culty church that she joined. Last episode, we heard about how she had to do some insane hazing rituals to get into this elite group at her church. And you will see that we are just getting started. So let's get into it.
About time where we start talking about, like, should we be moving into phase 2? And we kind of like are kicking around the idea of like, okay, when I move into phase 2, I'll switch from Dan being my covering to John being my covering. And phase 2, so phase 1, get to know each other, no feelings, blah, blah. Phase 2, we loosen the rules so that you have room to fall in love. So now you're allowed to go on dates. You're allowed to talk more often. And all these rules that are like, I rattled off all the rules that I had. They were decided on a couple to couple basis. So everyone had different rules. I was only allowed 10 text messages. His daughter was allowed 40. I was only allowed 30 minutes. His daughter was allowed 2 hours.
Yeah, so it opens the door for him to be as controlling as he wants to be. Because even if you enter phase 2, he could say, well, phase 2 for you guys as a couple, because you've been late to church or you have whatever, your phase 2 is going to look a little different than everybody else's. And it's a way to control and punish you
100%.
For getting out of line or speaking up a little too much.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So it's like getting to the point where it's like, okay, maybe we should start talking about phase 2. He asked me, are you ready for phase 2? And I was like, I think I am. Like, but I don't. And I've posted the screenshots of this conversation. I was like, I don't really know how to know if I know. And I'm like having this vulnerable conversation, basically like being like, teach me how to know if I know everything, because the only way that I would like, how do I know what I don't know? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think that from what I've learned, Brad seems like a very godly, honest man that would be an amazing father, an amazing husband. And that's the kind of person I want in my life. And as far as I see, there's nothing that would stop me from marrying him at this point. So then he's like, okay, so you want to move into phase 2 right now. Are you sure there's absolutely nothing about him that could be a red flag? And that's what I was like, how do I know? And he's like, it doesn't really sound like you're ready. And then like dismisses everything I say and like cuts it down. Waits a couple weeks, starts the conversation again. Are you ready to move into phase 2? But he doesn't start it with the phase 2 question. This time he says, like, how are things going with you guys? Blah, blah, blah. And then says, so if you guys were to get married, would you go to his church or is he going to come to our church? And I'm like, well, we haven't talked about it. And he's like, well, why don't you know this? And I'm like, because we're not allowed to talk about the future. And he's like, well, this is really important. I think you guys need to discuss it. And then starts like, make sure that just the two of you are talking about this and you're not talking to other people about it. We don't want to cause any confusion or allow too many voices in to cloud your judgment. Okay. So now I'm literally leaving voicemails because that's how we communicate. I'm still only allowed to have a certain amount of messages. And I need to discuss, hypothetically speaking, if you and I ever got married, which is awkward to bring up, like, not allowed to talk about the future with you. But if we did have a future, would you come to my church or would I go to yours? And he's like, listen, I haven't really told you how I feel about Church of the Harvest very much because this is your church. But there are some things that don't really line up biblically, in my opinion. And I don't know that I could, with good conscience, like, live there and be in ministry in there. Mm-hmm. Plus, he had this, like, really great job in Sonora. And, like, it was so, like, a lot of hypotheticals. So I go back to Dan and say, hey, hypothetically speaking, I think we would eventually go to his church. And he goes, okay, well, I don't see why there's any wait. When would you like to start that transition? I was like, whoa. First of all, I had just taken over this ministry. I was doing really well. I was really proud of myself to be the small groups leader. And I was building the curriculum for that. It wasn't even like live yet. So I'm revamping this whole program. I'm supposed to be doing all this. And he's like, when are you leaving the church? I'm like, if we get engaged, I think that would be a good time to start discussing it. And that is over the many years that I've been in church. People who go to 2 different churches, engagement is when you start making those kinds of conversations. It's like when you start talking about like moving your money together or not, or, you know, like that's when those conversations happen. It's not meant to be happening in a 4-month-old relationship between people who are just getting to know each other. But he's like, I don't see why there's any reason to wait. Let me know when you want to start making this transition. And I start having like the most insane like mental breakdown. What do you mean? Like, this is like everything and he's like making comments like, do you really know what marriage is? Like, and like questioning my mental stability in the sense of like, you're making all these fast decisions. Like, are you sure that you actually want to be with him? And like twisting it in a way that like, now I'm questioning, should I even be in this relationship or should I leave the church to be in it? Like making this big dramatic, like, thing.
And I think what he is doing, and obviously you'll continue on, but I think one thing that he's doing here is he's trying to make the stakes really, really high to get you to get in line. So in a way, he's throwing his hands up and saying, well, if you're going to leave, just leave.
Exactly.
You know, so then it makes you think, well, then maybe I don't want to leave. Maybe it's really like he's doing a reverse psychology thing on you to try to make the stakes really high.
He went as far as in that, in the middle of this conversation, pausing and saying, think about all the people who have left West Coast. Are they successful now? And he starts listing people who had previously left. There was one girl who her dad used to run the Master's Commission, and she was having some issues like with her marriage and had been in ministry and then out of ministry, and she's doing amazing now. And I'm still friends with her. I love her, but like use her as an example. One of my dearest friends from back, she went to church with me in Napa. She went to church with me at like, she did the Master's Commission there. Like, and I talked to her at least weekly, if not more. And she has gone through this crazy deconstruction process. She had previously been on staff at the church. And when she left, I vividly remember sitting in the office and then like pulling out her Facebook profile picture and being like, making fun of her physical appearance after she had left. Been like, oh man, like she gained a bunch of weight or she lost a bunch of weight. She looks like she's on drugs. I think she's a lesbian now. Like, and just like tearing her apart.
Yeah, it's a cult. Like 100%. It's everybody who leaves is worse off. Yeah. So you need to stay.
And if you are choosing to stay with your family and Brad, and if you allow them to pull you away from ministry, do you want to end up like them? Because none of them are successful. And that was the verbiage he used. Like, none of them are successful. So is that what you want for your life? And none of them are in ministry. Is that what you want for your life? So then I'm like, oh man, like I can't lose my dream, my life purpose that like, this goes back to like the very beginning of our conversation. Like this is something I've been working towards since I was 12, 13 years old. So now, you know, almost 10, it's like 8 years later, I'm like, well, do I want to end up like that? And I'm very confused and very distraught. And my parents finally sit me down and say, listen, we're done. You can, as soon as you move into phase 2, we're taking over. Like, you need to just tell him that. You can still go to the church and like, we're not going to pull you from there. Like, we support you, but this one thing we're going to help you with. And I like say, okay. And I, sent the pastor a text message that said, we've decided, that we want to move into phase 2 and that John's going to be our covering from here on out, which, mind you, like it was always supposed to be the father figure.
Yeah, that's nothing out of the ordinary. And it was supposed to be that way in the first place. I had opted for Dan to be the covering because he had convinced me that my family was too separated from church to be a good covering for me. So he was like, okay, so what does that look like? And then it immediately sends, actually, never mind. Since I'm no longer your covering, then it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. And this like really like a rude text message being like, well, you're on your own now, kid. Like, whatever. So I'm like worried about that. I'm like having
a full mental breakdown. Like during like, there was like a whole week that this is transpiring that I'm like disassociating, like just sitting on a couch, staring at a wall for I don't know how long. At one point, I like was in my room and my parents and Brad come to check on me in my bedroom. And I like jumped up on my bed and like moved into the corner, was like holding the wall, crying because I thought someone was like attacking me. And it was just, and they're like, we're just checking on you. Like, what is going on? Like this entire like break from ministry ruined my psyche during this time. So at one point I'm like knowing that we're going to move into phase 2, all this stuff. And I go over to Abby's house, who went to India with me. And we're having a girls' night. She's now married to JD, the guy I wanted to date previously. Mind you, It's a small church group. It's very incestual. We all dated each other's exes. So I'm sitting on her couch and she says, hey, how are you doing? I just wanted to check on you. And I was like, yeah, like fine. Because I'm being told I'm not allowed to talk to anyone. It was very, very specific. I wasn't allowed to talk to my best friends. I wasn't allowed to talk to any leaders in the church. I wasn't even allowed to talk to my parents about it. I was only allowed to discuss the transition out of my ministry and into like my courtship situation with Brad and Dan. And that was it. So I'm sitting there. I'm not allowed to talk about it. And Abby says, well, I just wanted to see how you were doing because I know how excited you were about small groups ministry, but now JD's taking over. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, well, Dan talked to JD the other day because now that you're going to be leaving the church, JD's going to be the small groups leader, like immediately. And I'm devastated. And I just start sobbing. I'm like, what do you mean I'm leaving the church? What do you mean JD's taking over? She's like, oh, well, that's just what JD told me. They talked about it. So now they've already established how I'm getting replaced in my ministry. And of all people, my ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
Gross. And I'm just like, what in the heck? So I go home from that girls' night and I have a full breakdown. And I want to say it was like a Friday or a Saturday night. And then I go and I talk to them. We pull the plug on everything. I'm in phase 2 from here on out. Dan's not in charge anymore. I'll talk to him when I talk to him, but whatever. And we were going to go to Jesus Culture and my church that Sunday because they both had 2 services and I could like barely make it in time. It was just across town. And we decide I'm not going to Church of the Harvest that Sunday. I didn't have any responsibilities. I didn't have to like usually I was in the sound booth. It was a random Sunday that I didn't have to be anywhere. I just don't show up. And I didn't call or text anybody. And I think in the 9 years that I was there, unless it was a like trip for the church or like 2 or 3 vacations, I had only missed 2 Sundays ever. I've never missed church.
So they definitely noted it.
Well, no one texted me. No one asked where I was. Nothing. So I was like, oh, maybe no one noticed. Because we had multiple services, it's easy to like dodge people. Maybe no one noticed. But for me, that was a crazy like move. And so I don't go to church. And then we always had Mondays off. The pastor's assistant, Dina, calls me Tuesday morning and I'm on a date, like one of my very first dates ever with Brad because he was about to go into surgery the next day. We went to the Sacramento Zoo. It was like the cutest little, like very G-rated date ever. Went to the Sacramento Zoo and Taco Bell. And she calls me as we're on our way and she's like, hey, I have all the information for the fundraiser that you're supposed to be doing on Friday that you're supposed to leave. It's in your email. I bought your flight because they were going to drive my car to LA. I was going to fly there and then do the fundraiser and I was going to drive back because I would just let them use my car all the time. It was just ridiculous. And I start breaking down on the phone. I said, Dina, I can't be in charge of people right now. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, my mental health is not okay. I'm having extreme panic attacks. I can't leave the house without having a panic attack, which was true. I was on the state. It was like a whole thing to get this far. And I was like, I'm unwell. I can't be responsible for 15 people. And I'm not okay. She goes, Alisha, you're scaring me. What's going on? And at this point, like, she was previously like my roommate and we were very close. And I was like, I'm not okay, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because I had been told by Dan I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And I was still very much under that control. And she goes, okay, I'm going to call and see what's up. And then I'll call you back. Okay. An hour later, I get a text message saying that I was removed from all ministries at the church, pending an explanation. They didn't understand after 9 years of service why I would abandon my post, that I have, without a word, stopped attending the church, let go of all my responsibilities, and like made this whole thing. I missed one Sunday service and told them that
one
I was
Sunday
having,
service. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one service. And I told them that I was having a mental health crisis. And they responded with that text message saying that I was fired.
Yeah, the fact that they didn't reach out, or Dan didn't reach out to see if you were okay and see how they could be the hands and feet of Christ, right, to try to support you during a really dark time. And instead they punished you by kicking you out of ministry after 9 freaking years of being dedicated. That is so insane.
And the crazy thing is as they hit send on that message, they had already had all of my peers and my students in the office and sat them down and said, does anybody know where Alisha is? We're very concerned. We think that I don't think they used the term run away because that sounds culty, but basically they said, we don't know where she is. We don't know if she's safe. Has she been talking to you guys about trying to like go live in the world or anything? Like, starts questioning them. So now they're all being told that I ran away, I quit without notice and am leaving ministry, and they don't know why or where I am or if I'm safe. Like, did she get kidnapped? Like, this whole like vibe. One of them were very good friends with me and immediately was like, I don't believe this. What's going on? She's the only one. Everyone else was like, wow, I can't believe Alisha quit. I can't believe like Alisha left. And like, it's just insane because they did the exact same thing they did to Amber, to Christine, that they would bring us in and say, they told us that Christine got fired because she threw a rager at the elder's mom's house and they were having a hot tub party and everyone was getting drunk. She had 3 people over there after she had already told them that she wanted to quit the church. And between the 4 people sitting in a hot tub, they shared 1 bottle of wine. And they told us that she threw a rager and everyone was plastered drunk and probably having sex. They create these stories. They create these like, this is how people leave and this is how people like, get fired or whatever it is. So that's happening to me. And I'm like, I sent this really nice text message being like, this is never how I wanted to leave, but I'm just going to basically take the L. I'm just, okay, I'll accept it because I just was so unokay. And like, they were saying that I wasn't responding to any messages or calls during this whole thing between the beginning of the mental health issue that I was having that was on like a Monday or a Tuesday. My dad had randomly been like, hey, I'm in town. Do you want to go have lunch? I sit down at lunch with him and I just started sobbing and he was like, what is going on? And I told him everything was going on and he and I agreed that I would go to Napa, and I spent a couple days just like in my childhood home, which was so great. And he just let me just like exist there. And my mental health was so bad at that point that I would like have to put FaceTime on and like fall asleep with like Brad on FaceTime next to me because I just was like, would panic attack constantly.
Yeah.
So like, all this is happening. I have so much support from my family, my dad, my mom, like everyone's just like, all right, like they all knew this was coming eventually, that something would happen. I would leave the cult, and they were just waiting for something to happen because they had been hoping it. And they were just like kind of ready to like catch me as I fell. And like the first time I saw my grandma after this whole fiasco, she's just so sweet. And like her and her husband, my step grandfather, been my grandfather my whole life. They're like, Mija, we were so worried about you. We thought that you were being groomed to become his wife one day. And we knew that this, like, we've always gone to church and we always believed in God, but this wasn't God. And this isn't the way that, like, Jesus wanted church to be. And, like, we're just so happy you're out. And they were, like, crying and hugging me. And I was just like, I was shocked. Like, what do you mean I was in a cult? And it took so long for me to, like, put two and two together that I spent 9 years in an abusive, culty church that I let these people, like, run every aspect of my life. And it started so young, and the abuse was so ingrained in me that a text message, a pin on Pinterest, like, every little aspect of my life was, like, completely controlled by this one man.
Or they had your family come with $18,000 in cash.
Yeah, so my parents decided to gift him $18,000 because it just miraculously happened to happen right when they were getting the settlement from my stepdad breaking his neck. Like,
did he know that? Whoa, I didn't put that together before. So he knew that they were getting a settlement.
We were very
and now
open
all of a
about
sudden
it. It was
he
such a long process. And, like, mind you, like I said before, we had been living like 1 million people deep in a 2-bedroom condo, and, like, couldn't even get food stamps because we had previously made too much money before, and now we're on one income, and we had too many cars and blah, blah, blah. So now we're, like, living in this condo. And we finally, after it was, like, almost to the end where we would have had to, like, gone to trial, they do the settlement. So we get however much money, and my family tithed to the church, and that was, like, I think it was like $1,700 or $17,000 or whatever it was. It was an insane amount of money. 17, I think, maybe 20. And then Dan said, I need $18,000. And he had been really open about the house was going to be foreclosed on. And he talked from the pulpit about how, like, there would be notices on the door, and he taught the kids to just rip them off and throw them because they trusted God and they were living by faith, and they didn't have to worry about foreclosure because God would provide. And he had stopped paying on the house. So we decided to gift him the amount of money he said he needed to save the house. He couldn't take a check because something was up with his taxes and bank account. And I had heard him make comments about that before too. We would go out to dinner and he's like, oh, I need to use the church card to pay for this because there's an issue with my bank account. So I just put money into the church card and then I use that. Like,
it's interesting that he felt like he needed to explain that because I think he knew that he was doing something not right.
Absolutely.
And he had to explain to you a reason why it would make sense for him to use the church card.
I'm 16, 17 years old at this point, and I'm like listening to him talk openly about how he has to use cash for everything because an issue with his taxes in his bank. And, like,
yeah.
So to me, I believe it was like some kind of, like, weird computer glitch, not like fraud.
Wow.
So he explains that he needs it in cash. We show up with a duffel bag full of cash. They had to, like, make an appointment with the bank to, like, be able to get that many, like, bills.
Oh, I'm sure your bank isn't just going to give you $18,000 in cash that easily.
We get all the money out in cash. We show up at, like, 11 o'clock. And it was, like, right around the same time as camp, and I had just ridden to camp with him, and I had left my thyroid medication in his Suburban because I was born without a thyroid, which is also a whole other thing. And which you and I can talk days about the whole healing world.
Oh, I believe it. I bet they jumped all over you trying to heal you.
I spent 2 years of my life on 2 separate occasions, so a total of 4 years, not taking my thyroid medication that I need to survive because I was born without a thyroid because I believed God was going to heal me. So
and it's expected to do that because if you really had faith, you wouldn't be relying on your medication.
Exactly.
Wow, that's so atrocious. They could have killed you.
100%.
Wow.
So
that's terrible.
We pull up window to window, and I happen to have left my medicine in his car, And he makes the joke, you got the money, I got the stuff. And they trade a duffel bag for my bottle of pills in front of the church. And we laugh and drive off. Fast forward 3 years, he went and like said how good God is from the pulpit, that he never paid a dime towards his house. And God allowed him to live in that house for 3 years without paying. And he had owed $18,000, but he never paid it. And that the foreclosure never actually went through for a full 3 years. And that he finally was losing his house 3 years later because God had allowed him to stay there that long. And we were like, but you had the $18,000. Where'd that go? Well, funny enough, the church had blessed him with a trip to Hawaii a couple months after we had gifted him that money.
Oh my God. I can only imagine being there in the congregation, hearing him give this BS story about how God blessed him with 3 extra years there, thinking that your money went to saving his house. Right. And you're putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that you probably just fronted this dude's Hawaiian vacation.
Right.
Wow.
And like,
oh my gosh, what did your parents think at this point? Were they like
why my parents like were no longer there? And like,
oh, absolutely.
Between that and a few other things, several other things, Dan was caught in a few lies and he called him out. And there was another pastor that was like mediating this conversation where John was like, you're a liar. This isn't okay. And this other pastor was like, you need to chill. This is a man of God and all that stuff. And my family was like, that's it. I'm out. Like, we're done. And around that time was the whole JD thing. And then I was like, my parents are leaving. Well, I'm not going to, like, I chose the church. 100%. I chose the church. Like, you guys don't believe in my, like, calling. You don't believe in who I'm supposed to be. I now live with my brother, who is my stepbrother, but my brother. And he always jokes. He's like, you really need to make a video about how the entire time you were at this church, I tried to tell you it was dumb and crazy and you were in a cult, but you didn't listen to me. My brother is hilarious and ridiculous. He's got some like big, like Jack Black energy. And like, he said that if I make a video, which I probably will, like, spoiler alert, saying how he was always telling me that I was dumb for being in church. But then I need to cut to a video I have of him where he is wearing a pair of leggings that's about 6 sizes too small for him. And he like turns around in the Walmart like changing room and says fitness and like scrunches up his butt. And he has like, his butt is like bigger than any city block. Like he has a full Kim K butt. And like, it was just so funny. But like he and my sister-in-law were always like, yeah, we knew you were in a cult. We tried to tell you, but like you were so gung-ho about it. And like, even when my family were like, listen, like, he took this $18,000 and like didn't use it for his house. He lied. Like all these things were happening. And I was like, yeah, but this is where I'm called to be. And the Holy Spirit brought me here and not everyone's perfect or you don't know the whole story. Like I had all these excuses for these people, but full blown cult. And like all this to say, I got on this tangent because the amount of like psychological abuse that happened so early on allowed for this like courtship insanity to like create this world where I would go along with these things.
When you were talking about how long you had been in this, you were so young when you joined this cult. Everything feels reasonable.
Yeah.
Because you are introduced to it at such a young age. And at that age, you kind of just accept what is presented to you. So it is not surprising to me that it would feel reasonable to have phase 1, phase 2 rules, and you just kind of accept whatever he's saying at that point because you were groomed at such a young age to think that that was reasonable behavior.
Absolutely. And like, one of the topics that we're going to talk about with the financial abuse beyond the fact of the $18,000, while I was in ministry, so my first year, you're not allowed to have a job. So I'm paying tuition. I'm living there. I only have 1 day a week. And you had to have special permission to work on that 1 day a week off. But in your second year, and when you're an intern, you're kind of allowed to, but you kind of have to get it like approved. At one point, I was living in an apartment by myself in a very sketchy, like, I'm talking gunshots and prostitutes in front of my apartment neighborhood. And I was working part-time at the apartment complex I lived at. I worked part-time as a Costco sample lady. I was an assistant for a Mary Kay director, which is a cult in itself. And
yeah,
it was rough. And, you know, I'm doing all of these things, just try to make my rent, which was only $580, which I wish I could find an apartment for under $600 right now. And, but I was only allowed to work if it was approved by Dan and like in my schedule because I was an intern. So there were times that I'm working, like I said, 1 day a week at 3 different jobs on doing a double in a day just so I could try to make ends meet. I'm eating food that's donated to the church that's literally expired. Like we're getting donations from these churches, or the church is getting donations from these organizations that we would then pass out to like our church on the street program, which is where we would just go give groceries to people. But it's like expired food and like gross. Mm-hmm. I'm like trying to live on that, trying to do all that. And then we had a fundraising program through the discipleship program. So as a first year, you have to be a part of the fundraisers. And that's that. If you were a second year in Elite Academy or a third year in Master's Commission / intern, you were allowed to apply for the fundraising program where we would start making money. So we would do fundraisers through the church. And if you were part of the program, it was like all in or not. If you wanted to be able to make money, then you had to be okay with doing every single fundraiser that they threw at you. If you wanted to opt out completely, then don't expect to ever make money through the fundraising program. So we're doing this program where a lot of times we would go to like corporate events, like Microsoft conferences or like things like that. We did a PGA tour, some like big events where we would do like security or registration or whatever. We would just be like the hired help. We would go and volunteer our time there. And in lieu of paying us, they would donate to our nonprofit. And if you got to the certain point in our fundraising program, you were allowed to start earning money through that, which meant that they would take however much money that we earned on that fundraiser, take away any expenses that it took to get us there or for us to do the fundraiser. And then whatever was left over, they would divide that by half. Half would go to the church, half would go to me. And we're only making like $12 an hour at these things. And I'm working like PGA tours, whatever. We would have to go to LA. I went to Florida. I went to Phoenix. So some of these things, like the expenses to get me there were pretty expensive. Unless I was driving my own car, which I did often, they would pay for the gas, but it's not like they're paying for my tires or my oil change or anything like that. So now I'm driving there. I have to take time off of work, my limited job that I'm allowed to have at all. I'm working insane hours for low wages. One of the fundraisers that we did that was local was actually answering calls for the K-Love and Air One pledge drives. So if anybody gave to K-Love and Air One, I might have been the one that said, hello, thank you for calling K-Love. Are you calling to make a pledge?
Yeah.
And, you know, like all these crazy fundraisers. Well, one of the fundraisers that we used to do was driving for Doug. And it's such a weird thing to like, just a weird sentence is driving for Doug. But there was an elder at our church and he had a business where it was a logistics business that he would like get a bunch of stuff delivered to a warehouse, split it up amongst a few drivers, and everyone would make those deliveries. And it was like big, like reels of wire and reams of paper. There was times that I had to lift like this huge reel that was like bigger than me and had to figure out how to like roll it out of a van. We were driving these like totally creepy, like stalker vans with like no windows, like the ones like has free candy on the side of it, like very creepy. And they always had like bald tires and it was very unsafe. The one that I was driving one day, like the seatbelt didn't even work. And like when I would turn the headlights on, the dash lights would turn off, which is backwards. And it was sketchy. I'm like driving at 4 a.m. in a like huge rainstorm and I hydroplaned, hit the center divide, ended up in a ditch and totaled this van. Should have died. Like this accident was so bad. I remember my forearm hit the windshield and like spiderwebbed the windshield. My head hit the like visor. The steering wheel went into my stomach, had bruises all across my stomach. But besides that, no like real injuries or anything like that. But I remember driving 4 a.m. on my way to the warehouse. I get into that accident, and he was a few minutes behind me on the way to the warehouse as well. So he pulls over because JD had called him and said, Alisha just got into an accident. You need to go get her, because he was ahead of me, saw in his rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. And he pulls up. I swear it was an angel or something, like one of those stories where like someone shows up and then like disappears. But this like really sweet Mexican guy runs down the ditch, pulls me out of the window because we couldn't get the door to open, helps me up and says, don't worry, the firefighters are on their way. I saw him talk to the police and then he was gone. And like, he helped me. I was like so convinced that the van was going to like explode or something. I watched too many movies. Like I saw like smoke.
I'd think the same.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to die, you know? So I'm sitting there on the side of the road and it's raining and Doug's like, are you okay? And I was like, am I okay? And I was so out of it. And I kept like touching my forehead and feeling that it was wet. And I was like, is this blood or is this rain? Is this blood or is it rain? He goes, I don't see any blood. And I was like, okay. And he goes, are you okay? I said, yeah. Am I okay? And he goes, yeah, you look great. And I was like, okay. And he starts like walking me to his car. And I say, the firefighters are on their way. And he stops dead in his tracks and looks at me and says, you called the firefighters? I said, I didn't. He did. And I'm pointing to the guy that's like, Mr. Angel guy looking at me like, I don't know. And I was like, yeah, the firefighters are on their way. And he goes, oh no, and starts freaking out. And I'm like, what? He goes, okay, when they get here, I need you to be very, very careful about what you say. I am your friend. I am not your boss. You're moving my van so that it can get smogged. And his priority right now is that I tell the cops the right story. Yeah. And asks me to lie, which I do. And I mean, I didn't really have to lie because they weren't asking me about the van or anything. But come to find out, it wasn't registered because it wasn't smogged. And if you're not from California, smog is like the emissions test that you have to do before you get registered. And if your car is not registered and it's not smogged, it means that it does not have insurance. That's just like how those things work. And I had no idea that those things worked that way because I was 20 at the time and had no clue. So we get into his car after I talked to the police, and like I told the firefighters I did not want to see, like I didn't want any treatment because I knew I couldn't afford it. I didn't have like the ability to. And I'm like crying, and I was like, I'm fine. I really should have gotten checked out. Who knows like what could have been wrong with me. We go back to the warehouse and he like hands me the keys to his personal car and tells me I need to make some deliveries. And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable driving. I'm terrified. And he was like, well, these deliveries need to get done. So I need you to go do this, this, and this. And I'm like sobbing, asking him to like, let me not. And again, he's like, nope, you're doing it. So I had to do deliveries that day. The next day I was also scheduled to drive for Doug. And I show up and he's like, all right, we're going to go to the tow yard. I'm like, all right. Like I figure like I'm just riding along with him and doing whatever. We show up to the tow yard. The van looked like it had been like bulldozed. And we had been making the joke that it was a sick horse that I put the bullet it needed in it. That the van was so broken down and so unsafe in general that it shouldn't have been driven anyway. So we go to the tow yard and they say, all right, it's going to take $960 to get this out. And we couldn't even drive it away anyways. So we're like, oh, well, what if we just like give it to you for scrap metal? Like, how much money would it be then? And they're like, all right, it'll be $535. And this grown man looks at me like, pay them. And I'm like, I don't have money. And I'm in my mind, I know the exact dollar amount. In my savings account, I have $212. And I'm like, I don't have any money. He's like, well, like you wrecked the van, like you need to pay for it. And then we're like, wow. Okay. And they're like, all right, well, any day that it stays here overnight, it's an additional $50. So we leave there and he's like, all right, well, like, let me know how you want to figure this out. And he drives me back to the church and I'm freaking out. I call my dad. I'm like, Dad, I need money. This is what happened. And my dad says, I'm sorry. And I don't want you to be mad at me, but I will not partake in this. That man has a business which means that he should have insurance. He should have business insurance. This is not your responsibility. You shouldn't have been driving it in the first place. You weren't legally working for him, and it is not your responsibility to pay for this, and I will not co-sign on it. You're not getting my insurance information, and you're not getting my money. And that was the first time my dad really put his foot down. I had walked all over him for years with like demanding to go to the private school that wasn't accredited and joining these programs before I turned 18 and all this stuff. And he finally was like, no, like, I'm not going to allow you to be taken advantage of in this way. So I'm like, how dare he didn't like help me, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like freaking out. I didn't tell my mom about the accident until like 2 days later. I was so like scared because I knew she would see the bruises and freak out. And I had figured out what I was going to do because Dan says, hey, I want to have a meeting with you. Come to the church. So I show up and it's me, Dan, and Doug in the office. And he's like, all right, the church can't afford to help you out with this, but I can. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a personal loan. The church is going to pay me back when it can. And then you just pay the church back when you can. So now your fundraising balance is just going to be minus $535. So anytime you do a fundraiser or anything like that, you'll just be working towards this balance. So now I'm in debt. I had already paid off my tuition. I already paid off all these other things, but I'm in debt to the West Coast Uprising because of this accident. So from then on out, any fundraiser I did, anything that I did to like earn or work for money was going towards that balance.
That's so horrible.
And I recently
because it was never your responsibility in the first place.
No.
Hearing your story, it's just, there's so much there. And I'm sure you could tell stories for days, just like I could tell a story for days. Like when I sat down to try to record my own episode, I was like, I don't even know what parts to tell because there are so many atrocious things that happened throughout it. But the fact that, thank God, or thank whatever, that you were able to get out of this and that it was kind of the perfect storm where, your family was just waiting for something to happen for you to finally be able to get out. And the part that stuck out to me was when you said you went to go visit your dad and you just got to exist.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a really hard time when you leave these culty systems because you feel so isolated and alone and confused and you're grappling with, what did I just come out of? Was it really that bad? But there is a level of freedom of, oh my gosh, I can just exist. Like, I'm not answering to anybody. Like, what do you mean I can just live?
Absolutely.
Without these sorts of rules. And I know for a while I felt guilty, because they make you think that you can't be a part of the world.
Right.
Like, don't be a part of the world. So is this freedom really freedom? Am I feeling false happiness? Is this real happiness? Because the church would always talk about false happiness. Yeah. Unbelievers, they have fake happiness. They're not really happy, So you're so afraid that you are backslidden like these other people. So when they start talking bad about all these other girls that left the church, it's grooming you to not want to be like them.
I spent
very us versus them.
I spent years feeling like, who am I going to be? What am I going to become? What is my purpose in life? And anytime anything bad would happen, I'd be like, God's punishing me, and I went through a bunch of career changes and then like 2020 happened and I was just like, what am I supposed to be? Right before 2020 happened, I was pursuing a career in law enforcement and I was going to start with becoming a dispatcher. And I remember in January of 2020, I got a letter saying that they were not moving forward with my background process because in 2013 I had gotten too many red light tickets. And it made it so that like I had like too much of a criminal record. It was because of red light tickets. And that's all because of the stupid red light that I had right next to my student housing. Like I would like inch out and turn right on a red and it would like take my picture. It was a whole thing. And it was just like this like I was so devastated because like I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know what I wanted for my career. And it was just like yet another thing. And I was like, I'm not successful because I'm not in church. And like this is 5 years later at the time. And I'm like, God's punishing me because I'm no longer a believer. I was so devastated. And then everyone loses their job in 2020. And then I've gone through a few different career changes since then. And I had this like really beautiful moment about a week ago where I've had a few like things just fall into place lately. And I'm now owner of 2 businesses. I own an escape room with my family, as well as a social media marketing company on my own that I help entrepreneurs and small businesses just have a organic social media presence. And I had the opportunity to like make a little extra cash here and there. And I looked at my finances and I'm now making the most money I've ever made on a monthly basis in my entire life. Wow. And things just kept falling into place. And I'm able to live with my family, which I'm doing on purpose because my sister-in-law's due in a few weeks with baby number 3. And I get to be a part of like just being a Tia and being close with my nephews. And I'm able to just drop everything and drive to Napa when, my grandma's in the hospital or, my best friend needs a babysitter and I can just do that. And I have so many fun things. I got to go to this like movie festival this last week where I was able to connect with the Was I in a Cult podcast. So crazy. And I'm just like looking at all these things and all these blessings. And when I was in church, it was proof that I was being obedient. But now these things, it's like the universe, God, I use the word divinity a lot to like represent like all encompassing, like my vision of God, Holy Spirit and everything. Because I do have some beliefs. They're just not in a religious box. And I'm taken care of and I'm successful. Yeah. And I'm content and I feel blessed and I'm doing nothing by the Bible. I am not, as the way it was taught to me, like I am not a Christian. I do not read my Bible. I cuss. I don't follow all the same rules that I used to. And I feel like I'm still on the right track. And I feel like I'm living the way that God would intend for me to live. And I'm experiencing the blessings and the good karma coming back to me. I am reaping what I have sown, whatever, language you want to put to it. I am living in this beautiful space where I feel so much better than I ever have. I am dealing with so much less of my previous like depression and anxiety that I used to have. I've struggled with ideations of like harming myself and going further. And like the times that I was in the church that I used to have tear stains on my steering wheel in my car. And I left them there because it reminded me to act right so that I didn't get to the point where I was crying on my steering wheel in front of the church, wanting to delete myself ever again, because it was a sign to me that I needed to be obedient when I was in the church. And I don't deal with that anymore. And I don't live that way anymore. And I get to like pour into my nephews like this like life of like true prosperity that I never had while I was poor at the church. And, like these fundraising trips that we would go on, our budget to eat, because obviously they had to pay for our food, was $10 a day for all 3 meals. And I'd be in places like Vegas. Like, tell me where you can eat 3 meals on $10 in one day in Las Vegas. Like, I just went and bought McDonald's for my whole family, and it was like $70 because McDonald's is insane now. And I was able to just swipe my card and not look at my balance. And this is the first time I've ever lived that way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not rich. I'm not going to McDonald's for at least a week.
No, but you're thriving. And I think that's what I hope people take from this episode. I hope that you guys share it with somebody who might need it, because I think so often the church makes you feel like don't leave, or not even just the church, but also cults. They make you think don't leave. You're going to fail. You're not going to be successful. You're going to be miserable. Your mental health is going to be in the garbage can. Okay. But hopefully me and Alisha, it can show you that that's not true. Like the second you leave, it doesn't automatically make your soul lost or you're going to fall into depression. You know, you might be depressed for a little bit as you unpack everything that has happened to you.
Deconstruction is not for the weak.
No, it is not. And I think, I mean, that's obviously just such a whole process, but there's so much peace and happiness and still faith, still having beliefs, you know, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like what you always thought it was. And these very strict rules and guidelines where you're taught that the more perfect you are, that's when you're going to receive blessings. So yeah, I am just so thankful to have had you on. And can you please tell people where they can find you?
Yes. Okay.
And hear more of your story? Because I know you have so many stories.
It's insane. Yeah. And I have a few stories that I'm like, unfortunately, I haven't recorded in the last week. I was like, I had bronchitis and then like my grandma was in the hospital. I was not able to like put my phone in front of my face. But I started making videos. Basically, it started out as, while I was waiting for my pre-workout to kick in, let me tell you a story about my colt. And that all started on TikTok. I just moved them also onto Instagram, but TikTok has the most of it. I would like to eventually start a podcast. Everything will be under the name Spilling the Koolaid. The concept, if you don't catch it, I don't just spill tea, I spill the Kool-Aid. We're giving all the dirty stories that happen behind the scenes in ministry and in high control religion. I grew up, I'm in the Sacramento area. So if you need a recommendation of what church not to go to, just DM me. I'll let you know. Don't go to Church of the Harvest.
Anywhere but there.
Yeah, just don't go there. Actually, I hear they're doing really well, which is like cringy. They have like 2 like locations. Everyone's like, I went there once, it seemed fine, but a little off. And I was like, yeah, just don't join the staff. Like, don't do any discipleship there and don't join the staff, because it was all fine and dandy until I got really in there. But yeah, I'm spilling the Kool-Aid just like they would sound, you know, nothing spelt weird. And I am hoping to start a podcast soon. I would love to connect with more people who have stories like mine. If you have any questions about the things that I experienced, I do have 9 years worth of stories and have barely scratched the surface with all the insanity. So I would love to, you know, connect with more people and tell more stories.
Oh, and I know there's so many people. I think since sharing on TikTok, that was the thing that really struck me the most, is how many people have these stories. I thought that we were living some original experiences here, but
no one has experienced any original
No, I'm like, we have all lived in the insanity, and with the different denominations, it's different flavors of insanity, you know, so we will never run out of stories. And yeah, definitely go check her out on TikTok. And thank you so much for coming on, Healdish. Oh my God. I know people are going to love it because purity culture is insane. And this whole courting thing was just a dial up on. And it's wild. I didn't even get into
like all of the specifics either, but it's crazy. I do have my entire like courtship experience documented on TikTok. If you scroll down, one of them's pinned. It's wild and it's insane. I honestly, I think it's really funny, like looking at my stories and looking at like the correlations of the things that you experienced in yours, because we had a lot of similar experiences for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. And please share it on social media. If you guys could rate the show if you enjoyed it, and try to share it with somebody who you think might need it. I know that this story could really help a lot of people who are coming out of these very culty systems. So until next time, follow for next week. I'll have a new episode for Healdish.
Yay!